So it's our pleasure to have with us today 3 readers, but one is not feeling well today, so I'll be reading for Bill Isaac. But Larry W. Schnell will start off.
First, I want to thank Robert for providing this venue and Alice for helping out and introducing us. And I want to thank you for being here, because as artists and creative people, we can't operate in a vacuum. We need people to inspire us, and we need an audience, and we need a venue. Without that, we're nothing. So here we are. Thank you. The first story that I published a long time ago, we don't need dates, just a long time ago. And I'll start with a section of that. It's about a very arrogant academic man who moves into a small community and is doing research as a folklore collector with complete disdain for all the local people. The story's called Laura. I'm going to tell the story as I heard it, or one way that I heard it, for stories have a way among ignorant folk of changing as a river changes, as it flows along, sometimes overflowing its banks, sometimes meandering a bit from one spring to the next and never taking the same course twice. This story certainly overflowed its banks and the banks of credibility as well, but no one seemed at all bothered by flooding in the valley of ignorance. No, instead the people of Bloomville washed their feet in that ubiquitous nonsense and suckled their children in the same muddy water. My mind strays easily. Again, the story. It seems to start first with another story, and I will attempt to accurately reproduce the two, interjecting comments only when I feel I must compensate for the basic ignorance of my storytellers. Old Darwin Sickler was a peaceful enough fellow, living in a cabin with his wife Elsie and their 4 children. He was a portly frog of a man, she a lively wench. The children, like the parents, normal and healthy. Who would have thought it, Darwin being a churchgoer, that one bright day in April, the old man went as berserk as Elwyn Tillman's old hound. Elwyn's a neighbor of mine who will turn up later. He shot them all in cold blood. When Evelyn Allen stopped in that evening with some loaves of fresh warm bread, she saw the 5 dead, and old Dar sitting on the porch peacefully smoking his pipe, staring off somewhere in apparent contentment. He was shortly taken to the Justice of the Peace, who knew he should arrange a trial, but at the same time he had to listen to the lynch mob outside, not the quietest of whom was a good reverend of the Methodist Church. The Justice of the Peace did what most men do when they can't make up their minds. He appointed a committee. It was headed by the reverend, a good organizer if nothing else. They solved the entire dilemma in a matter of minutes by locating a length of sturdy rope, which seemed acceptable to everyone. Darwin was clearly in a bind when studying the 5 manila strands. He could not find so much as one flaw, and so had to agree with the findings of the committee, thereby absolving them of all responsibility. He was quiescent on that fatal morning when he stepped onto the scaffold. Before departing, the old fool repented, saying, "Forgive me, for I know not what I done." With that, they pushed him off. He danced a bit, shivered a little, and then relaxed. The people who bought his old shack in the woods a few months later said they could not use the water from the well because the blood from Darwin's family ran down it. It was next to the house, and ever after it pumped red water. Now, this red water theme is easy to ridicule, but is a type I've run across frequently. It seems to be related to man's need to have some tangible remnants of the past living with him in the present as a memorial or some such symbol. And he needs these remnants most where great acts of love, death, or violence have occurred. It is not unrelated to the gravestone tradition as I see it. For a complete study of the subject, see The Living Stone by F. Norton Hamilton. About a month after Darwin died, a story began to circulate that he wandered through the woods and fields and valleys with a lantern, which he swung gently, weirdly to and fro as he sought his missing head. Well, one can see, for example, why scholars of ancient Irish lore curse their ancestral scribes, foolish monks, when the adventitious figure of Christ appears on the scene set somewhere in the BCs, Well, Christ is next to integral when compared to the headless Darwin, who makes even myself, a professional story collector, cringe at the nonsense these people will permit to pass their lips. A man who has no head needs the lantern to find it, for he has no eyes, which are, of course, the light-sensitive receptors of our being. He may as well have walked in utter darkness, undoubtedly the same through which his ilk in town grope. Besides, no one who witnessed the hanging recalls the head separating from the body. Like the scholars of ancient Irish lore, I must concentrate on a few fragmented facts that remain. There is more. A girl named Laura Pierce lived in the hill country south of Bloomville in a fine, large house that she later inherited from her industrious, though not wealthy, and of course now dead, parents. She was born in Bloomville. She grew up there. She was the belle of the town, a classic picture of immature beauty at 12, a truly stunning woman at 21. She was beloved by the town, for she reveled in altruistic deeds. She visited people in their illness and gave small amounts of money and candy to the poor and hungry urchins who followed her about the sidewalks and parks like a herd of animals. Her virtue seemed limited only by her frailty, her small, thin but shapely frame, which made her parents somewhat overprotective. She was not allowed to participate in as many goodwill activities as she would have desired. It was her goodwill that precipitated her early end, they said in Bloomville, but her reward is in heaven. That catch-all where those unsuccessful in life have their just due. My note. She frequently walked the rough miles between her house and Bloomville in order to spend some time with Mrs. Miller, who lost the use of her legs. Laura helped her dress, bathe, cook, sew, and assisted her in other niceties which nature would have correctly deprived the old woman of, along with her miserable life, had it been allowed to take its proper course. But through the help of friends and the life-sustaining breath of the Holy Spirit, the woman dangled by that golden chain until one of its lightly plated links gave way. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Laura walked the rough miles alone. She visited the place about 3 times a week. She began the walk about dusk, not returning home until midnight or later. When weary from the long and perhaps frightening jaunt, she would tiptoe up the stairs, crawl quietly into bed, falling asleep almost immediately. Why did she walk alone? Indeed, should she have walked alone? The natives frequently asked these questions, having nothing better to concern themselves with. After all, the rough, rolling country was plagued with dangers for a frail girl. Most, through some erroneous reasoning, answer the question simply by laying the blame on the husband, a bright, well-educated, though somewhat aloof fellow, and a rather attractive man, who snatched the lovely creature from the faithful fold, selfishly depriving her of her precious virginity sometime before the grand occasion of the sacred rites. Actually, he found little difficulty. She was really a very lonely girl, and he had first to make her see her loneliness, then instruct her in the paradoxical ways of nature, the loneliness, the love, the cruelty, the kindness, the beauty, the horror, and she melted like so many candles consumed by their own flame. To bring the story to a rapid conclusion, one dark night, wisps of mist wandering in ghostly aimlessness through the black trunks of trees, damn them in their love of the Gothic. It was a clear night, the moon shining fair. She walked back home and saw the lantern waving, its yellow light breaking through the woods and shafts. She stopped, but did not scream or panic. She must have felt the malignity, or at least the cold indifference of the woods, as barren as a bleak winter sky. But she had, as a crusader who's been given some divine promise of security, a degree of composure as she watched the light move closer. Yes, Darwin Sickler, the headless man. She must have been certain of it as the light approached, for it had been seen 3 times now, and I'm sure the story would have reached her quickly. Laura watched until the light was so close she could make out the form behind the yellow sheen of lantern light. It was the dark shape of a man, except it had no head. She turned, ran, and at the same time heard the lantern fall and shatter. She must have felt lost and helpless, stumbling in the utter darkness, where the dimensions of time and space drew in their eternal boundaries, condensed themselves into that one great act of frantic escape. She had the lead at first, which must have given her a false sense of optimism, which in turn must have made the capture that much more of a blow, a cruel reality breaking through her feeble illusions. When she heard the heavy breathing, the footsteps close at hand, she must have come near despair. There was no hope. Nature's frailty could not compete with the brute force of the universe. In a second, she was thrown off balance and lay helplessly on the ground, where the dark shadow, like a bird of prey, brutally and painfully ravaged her thin body on dew-wet grass, choked the lifeblood from her feeble frame, and her blood drained tranquilly onto the ground. In a second, the effort was over. The night slept again, closing its eye with weary indifference on the scene. The dew continued to fall uninterrupted on trees, grass, stream, and corpse alike. It'll be readily evident to the astute reader that this is not the correct version of the story. True, all the events except the murder may be verified by one or more of the residents who claim to witness them. True that given the authenticity of the events, the description of the murder is supported by circumstantial evidence. But in my 2 years of work of studying the beliefs, the lure, the habits, and the ways of thinking of the people of Bloomville, I have been led to one inevitable conclusion. They are people incapable of objective observation because of deep-rooted superstitions, religious beliefs, and social values. Which is not to say there are no grains of truth to the story. I did, in fact, snatch Laura from the faithful fold. We married shortly thereafter. Within a year, she accompanied back to Yale, which I am sure was an eye-opening experience for her. When I began work on my dissertation, we returned to Bloomville. Her home was ours through inheritance, her mother having died 6 months after the wedding, her father 2 months later. The country home was ideal for us and for my research set in the rich green hill country. It offered rest, relaxation, and peace. I had a good supply of tales from the locals, and on this I based my work. Thus, I found it necessary to mix intimately with the indigenous characters, visit their taverns, their homes, their churches, and indeed show a sincere interest in them, which having done successfully, I now possess a fine supply of tales, one of them most remarkable. The rest of the story is about the remarkable tale.